Let me put my phone. Test, test. Yeah, it's working. Okay, I'm calling this work session to order. March 6th, 2025. And determination of a quorum. Have here. We're only missing one. And next item is you're up.
Oh, hi, my name is Michael Praden. I'm the liaison from the City Council to the Planning Commission. I don't have a whole lot for you today. I think I've seen one or both of these presentations that you guys are going to hear tonight, but I'm going to stick with it just in case you guys have questions. You probably won't, but that's okay. And just glad to be here today and hope we have a fun workshop. Easy peasy lemon squeezy.
All right. This is the time provided for individuals wishing to address the Planning Commission regarding issues not already on the agenda. Anyone have anything?
I haven't
Okay.
seen one over Zoom.
None over Zoom? Okay. And since we have no minutes attached, we'll get right on to the workshop. Defensible Space Development Code amendments. And let's take it away.
Get away. I can sit up here to share my screen. Good evening, good afternoon. Matthew Martin, City of Sisters Community Development Department. I do want to acknowledge that Scott Woodford is joining us remotely and is available for any additional comments or questions along the way. So tonight's workshop is to prepare for a public hearing on text amendments to a Sisters Development Code regarding defensible space. That's the protective buffers and vegetation management around structures and improvements on property to help mitigate the impacts of wildfire on those properties and throughout the community. So this goal is to prepare you for the scope of the amendments. I'll note that there's been several workshops with both the Planning Commission and City Council from an introduction of what defensible space is, its benefits, and we've worked our way in through developing draft defensible space standards to incorporate into our code and made some additional refinements. So this is an update to our last conversation, but acknowledging that there may be public interest and new commissioners to help get you up to speed on kind of its value and then what the proposed changes are. With this being a workshop, I welcome any comments or questions along the way, so don't hesitate to chime in. Do also want to acknowledge Jeff Puller from Sisters Camp Sherman Fire District is here with us for add any context or perspective from the fire district. As you'll see in the code provisions, the fire district is an important partner, administrator of this code. There is some level of authority granted to the fire district in what we're proposing. Okay, so diving right in, just a quick overview. Defensible space. Again, noted that it's the buffers and of vegetation management and other combustibles in proximity to structures and improvements on a property. As we look at it, it's generally in three concentric buffers: the immediate, intermediate, and extended. Different terminologies used, but it really thinking about that area in abutting the structure itself, then that subsequent area between 5 and 30 feet from the structures, and then the extended outwards to 30 to 100 feet. For the purposes of our code, it is we're focusing on the areas within 30 feet of the structure. That's recognition that within a city, your lotting pattern, your lots and your improvements are going to be in more closer proximity. While there's value of looking at the larger parcels, it's really outwards of the 30 feet is the of the most benefit, and the area that a individual property owner most likely will have some control over. But that initial immediate or ignition area is of most importance because it prevents the actual ignition of the structure due to kind of contact with the embers and the structure. Whereas you move away, you provide additional opportunity for maintaining vegetation in higher density or different species, and requiring less vegetation removal or management, and highlighting the management or maintenance, because of course vegetation does have a tendency to grow, so there's a need for ongoing maintenance of the vegetation to ensure the effectiveness of the defensible space. I should back up real quick. This is one part of a strategy, and then the other is building hardening. We're not so much focusing on building hardening due to limitations that we do have as the city to implement actual building code provisions. Oregon has a statewide universal code that applies to buildings, and so it takes quite a substantial effort that may not be feasible here for sisters to take on. So we're not incorporating that into our development code, but want to acknowledge that building hardening of using fire-resistant materials, reduced screening size in your vents and soffits and foundation vents to allow the structure to be fire-resistant, but also prevent ember drift and those embers, drifting underneath the structure or up into your attic space.
Is
and then
Deschutes
catching the
County coming
structure.
out with their own? Because anything built here in Sisters, Deschutes County, their building department handles it. Do you know if they're coming out with a parallel set of codes?
Of building codes or defensible space codes?
Well, building codes, we were just talking about that we couldn't really do it here, but
Yeah, so we wouldn't have a special amendment for within the city limits, but the same codes, and there are fire-resistant building standards that are built into that universal building code. And so that would apply both to Deschutes, same code, Deschutes County, City of Sisters. So the same level of requirement and protection, it remains the same. And I'll note that Deschutes County did entertain or discuss adopting more extensive defensible space standards, but haven't initiated that process yet.
Are we, as a city and city councils especially, during annexation processes, are these some of the types of codes we could do for large new areas of construction? Is that something we would have control over?
With the defensible space?
Yes.
Yes. So, and we'll dive in that. So these will be applicable to individual lot development or the larger acreage development. So if we're looking at larger subdivisions or master plans or larger industrial sites, they would be applicable there as well as within. That gets back to making a local amendment to the building code. And not to get into those details, but you have to identify a special circumstance that applies here. And it's hard to justify that because it's identified that there is a wildfire risk.
otherwise
In
they're
general.
still be covered by the state and Deschutes County
Correct.
codes.
So that more broad application of the building hardening standards. But we're exploring different options that we can apply, and I don't want to jump to it too early, but we have options to incorporate Class A roofing materials as one of those requirements. And so we're exploring where we can maybe not amend the building code, but rather incorporate some other design standards that effectively require these more fire-resistant materials and building practices. Okay. let's dive in. Just want to give some background. As noted here, we've had multiple workshops and even some prior to October of last year discussing defensible space, but it was in October that we initially presented a framework and some draft code language for defensible space to begin to get some response and refinement of the standards. And in that November workshop with the October workshop with the City Council, there was some additional refinement that was identified to either change the proposal or go gather some more information, do additional research. That being one, the Class A roofing material. Original proposal was for Class B, which would allow for shake and shingle roofing materials. That is, in some ways, fire resistant, but still flammable. Council said that's not good enough. And so have an opportunity for Class A, that's your asphalt shingle, your metal roofs that are the highest grade of fire resistant roofing material. The other was to look into the work of the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety. They do a lot of study and analysis of what practices better add and improve the resiliency opportunities for structures. So a lot of research. If you were to look into those programs and the work they've done, it's actually quite fascinating. The extent that they go to test materials and different defensible space standards. So we looked into that and we're able to incorporate some of their recommendations. And then second was to look into the most recent fire resistant plant guide that was produced by OSU Extension Services. That was released in 2023. So it was a great suggestion to evaluate that to see what changes have been made in recent years that warrant updating the flammable plant list that we have. And some changes came out of both of those research projects.
Were there plants that were fire resistant and deer resistant?
So that's a great question. I am not the botanist or master gardener or horticulturalist or biologist to answer that question. But starting with the IBHS, originally we were the draft proposal included allowance for fire resistant plants within that initial 5-foot ignition zone, but the IBHS found that that still posed a fire risk by having those even fire resistant plants within that initial 5 feet. The idea was that at some point those plants are going to dry out either in the event of a fire or lack of maintenance. Then once they dry out, then they are flammable or as flammable as other more flammable species. So taking that guidance, we have incorporated a standard of no vegetation within that initial 5 feet, and no other storage of combustibles. So that's firewood or other wood fencing or other materials that are prone to combustibility.
Propane tank?
Well, so that maybe you need to bring in the experts, but there is they are fire resistant in their own way, and so that may be one of these trade-offs that will be discussed throughout this process. That with homes being heated or served by only electricity or propane, there is that need in many applications to have a propane tank, and so they've been known to be fire resistant to some extent and safe in proximity to a.
I would add that the propane tanks, a lot of times you see them with only the 5-foot lot lines, so that we can't even get it away from. So what we do is educate, it's the vegetation that's around it, and then working with HOAs where they're requiring screening around their propane tanks, and make sure they're not cypress trees that are screening it or arborvitae trees, or even wood fences that have vegetation underneath it. So anything that gets screened, it becomes part of the home, and we ask for that 5-foot zone of non-combustible up to the tank.
But wood fences are okay around a propane tank?
As long as there's no vegetation underneath it and it gets maintained and it's not so close that you can't clean out in between the tank and it's on the side.
Yeah,
So that-
that's, we have that in our HOA.
right?
Obviously, non-combustible would be better, you know, if it was a metal fence or.
Or bearing the tank.
Buried
right?
mine.
So this also includes your ground cover. We're looking for gravel or other non-combustible materials, so none of the bark mulch that we maybe have traditionally applied. This is a change in kind of in habit and how we've landscaped our properties for quite some time. So gone is the bark mulch near the house, gone are the arborvitae and the other juniper trees and things like that that have been used traditionally for decades. Do you have, oh, you turned off. I thought you turned on your mic. Excuse me. And then their other recommendation was crown spacing and vertical clearance of 10 feet from structures horizontally and then from the roof, as well as any chimney or and other roof projections associated with your combustible appliances. That is one standard that we already had incorporated into our code, so it's reinforcement of what we were on the right track with what we were proposing. So in some applications in defensible space, jurisdictions only apply the defensible space to the primary structure, the home, for example. They recommended in that we already had incorporated in it into the code that it applies to accessory structures. So if you had a shed or detached garage or even decks, the defensible space would be applicable to those structures on your property.
So that first graphic that you had up of the house showing the defensible space was really incorrect because it didn't have the space around the garage.
So there are a variety of strategies and thoughts about how to apply it. So this is an image that came from
Firewise.
so this comes from Firewise. So there's the different recommendations. So this doesn't quite go as far. So this is where we show that we're going above and beyond what even fire professionals or other fire-oriented organizations recommend. So this is more graphically valuable, but we'd be looking at that secondary or intermediate buffer to go around that detached garage.
If you don't have vegetation around a deck, is the deck still advisable or part of a wood deck?
So I think one thing to keep in mind as we apply these defensible space standards, we're not making fireproof climates or environments. So to be more fire resistant, sure, I think not having wood structures or those decks and using more of a fire resistant material is advisable. But there's a trade-off that if, you know, and allowing people some flexibility in what they're utilizing, that if you are going to use that, they're going to use that to be the extension of your structure that we're drawing the line around. So if you want to be more fire resistant, use an alternative material. If you want to use wood, that's fine. We'll just be looking to expand that buffer around that portion of your structure. Last, then having fences beyond, this is a unique one that we haven't incorporated into our code, but was looking at fences that are parallel or within 3 feet of each other, but not in more of a parallel or close proximity, because within 3 feet of each other, vegetated, dry, combustible material can drift into there, the leaves, the pine needles, other branches. And it often becomes neglected or hard to access. So you're going to have that if you're not actively removing that material, then that's creating an additional fire hazard and an opportunity for ignition.
That's one thing to look out when you're doing the screening around the propane tank. You're causing that parallel fence, you know, real close to the house, and is a great place to capture stuff. That's the word I'm looking for. That's
Yeah.
stuff in there.
Yeah,
Could be flammable.
and thinking about any barrier that you're putting on your property has the potential to collect this vegetative material. So this isn't to catch all for everything. There's a chance to capture on what are better building practices or other, you know, maintaining your property better.
Does that include when property owners build their fence back to back parallel? There's
It,
or two?
that's where that's the risk, you know, is that you're putting fences in close proximity. And so, yeah, within inches, incredibly challenging to get that removed. So we find this to be, well, you're maybe coming up with a real world example that you're experiencing. But so it's that, do we incorporate into our code something that may be a rare circumstance? So that's something that the planning commission can consider with any part of the recommendation to council.
I guess there's no part of the code that says you can't build it back to back. Like if your neighbor builds a fence and you're coming in with a new development,
Yeah.
then you're not allowed to.
Yeah, no prohibition of building your own fence or a parallel fence.
And is the fence clearly defined? Like, you got a row of rocks, is that a fence? Like, just wondered,
Yeah, we
definition.
don't have it committed to memory, but you start to, the definitions of fence and wall are quite comparable. Okay, moving to that research into OSU extension plant list. Again, most recent edition was adopted in 2023. And we had an original list produced for the prohibited flammable plant list. And in that research and cross-referencing, we found that actually it's been, with additional research, found that lavender and ceanothus are found to not be as flammable as originally or as previously considered. So it would be, see as we discussed the amendments, was the idea of removing those from the prohibited list.
Why isn't it just pegged to the OSU list?
We certainly can. Now we're identifying. It's one of the other. We have the fire resistant list or guide. We would be changing the language, I guess. So we wouldn't, in that guide, we wouldn't have the species that we want to prohibit. So we would have to be looking to see, to know what the species are that in the limited scope of the property, and then looking through that extensive list.
Just seems like if you don't peg it to something, then you're always gonna be adding and deleting stuff. Is that not true?
And there's the risk similarly that you're needing to stay up to date on a particular guide
Right.
that's outsourced. And we'll need to be updating the code to identify the most recent version. But duly noted. Okay, diving into the amendments and how our strategy is applied, just here a quick summary. Looking to apply this to the entirety of the city limits, recognizing that wildfire risk is consistent within our limited approximately 2 mile city limits that we have. And it provides an equitable application of the code instead of differently, recognizing that that's different from the wildfire risk maps that were produced and contemplated by the state of Oregon, whereas within the city limits there were different designations, moderate and high risk.
Didn't make sense.
So if there's not to, we're focusing on our proposal, not the merits of the map. But again, there was recognition that may not be consistent with the actual conditions in town, and kind of going back to the equitable application of standards and the equity of the risk that applies throughout the city limits. Now, these standards are going to apply to new development. So we're not looking retroactively at existing development, but we're looking forward at new projects that come in. That includes land divisions, partitions, subdivisions, master plans.
Major remodels it would apply to, wouldn't it?
And those site plans, but also new development falls under the definition of any addition to your structure or deck that exceeds 200 square feet of footprint. And in that case, we would be applying the defensible space standards to that new addition area. That's how it's proposed. The challenge, so we have a challenge, so it's recognizing, we're not applying these standards to existing sites. It's recognition that you may have an existing mature, fully developed portion of your property. So a 200 square foot addition to your deck if we're applying it to the entire structure, could be extensive and expensive. So it's like, I want to build a 200 square foot deck. Great. Now you have tens of thousands of dollars of landscape management and re-landscaping for the entirety of your property. So that's a policy decision. Is
But
if
in
it should,
practical terms, you're not really accomplishing much by having it only apply to your addition.
I agree.
Yeah.
So that, again, I think that's a policy consideration for the commission to consider in their recommendation.
Has council talked about that?
We haven't gotten into the specifics and to be,
We haven't got into the specifics yet. And honestly, you know, at this point, when we're building these things, we might have 5 different opinions. So, I think this is why it goes through this process. And this is one of those details that may change down the road but we're not really there yet. We're waiting for you guys to kind of shape things and get things as close as possible. And then we'll start hitting them one by one. And, much like, you know, these other things that we've done together, the final one's not final until we vote on it and pass it. So,
But no direction on that from council.
no, because it really hasn't even got to that point where we talk about these, you know, you're starting to talk about a really specific one piece of policy in a larger piece of policy. We kind of agree on the larger piece of policy that we need to do something, right? So
Right.
that's what we're doing. We're doing something. And I think that once you guys get through it one time, it'll come to us. And at that time, we'll either pass it or we'll fix a couple of things and pass it, or if it's way off, we might send it back to you guys, and that's happened a couple of times in the past as well. So, I think that would be getting the cart before the horse.
It's going
Yeah.
to be a difficult one.
Yeah, I mean, because there's 7 of you and there's 5 of us, that's 12 different things we could come up with, right? Times the 50 different pieces of policy in it, it's a lot of different ways it could go. But I think, you know, if we just always continue to think about why are we here? What are we doing? It's for whatever's the best for the community. And sometimes those harder decisions are the hardest ones because you're actually creating a bigger policy out of a smaller policy, right? But you have to, and we all have to do this when we're doing this, is just think about, you know, we don't want to overburden the public, but we don't want to be totally susceptible to a wildfire just blowing through town. So we'll find the sweet spot. And it may be to a lot of people's liking, but it might not be to everybody's liking. So,
What I didn't touch on at the beginning, but in the staff report, that we looked for guidance in developing these criteria. And we looked to the draft defensible space codes that Oregon State Fire Marshal's office has developed, and to other communities, in particular, the city of Ashland, who's known in the state to be a leader in wildfire risk mitigation, and the extent and the scope of what they've already adopted and implemented for quite some time. So acknowledging that this is the same standard that city of Ashland has employed. And one of their strategies is, you know, this is in concert with a robust educational program. So we're applying code to development that we can review and say, okay, you are consistent with this. Now you have a built environment. Now there's opportunity through education to say, here's what your best practices are. Not the law, but your best practices for maintaining your vegetation or your best building practices to create a better environment. So it's a trade-off and identifying what's palatable and you have the resources for to implement.
Matt, to your knowledge, has any municipality done any retroactive standards, or is that not something that people are doing yet?
I haven't found that. So we have, now, even City of Sisters has in our municipal code nuisance vegetation. That's when your grasses are getting too large or overburdened and a hazard in that way. So that may be an opportunity. But
Like,
look,
would you lean forward a little?
Sorry.
Are
Everybody else.
all the meetings that we attend are recorded as part of city, record?
Yeah. I
And
thought I
so
was
if
loud enough.
we ever get into
you want me to
court or
repeat it?
something, so you gotta make sure that you're
All right.
talking to the microphone. So
Yeah.
it won't be
Reminder for us
recorded.
but in conversations with City of Ashland, they did not apply, they've deliberately chosen not to apply it to the date, not apply standards retroactively or to existing built environments.
Yeah, they have a bunch of old Victorian houses and things as well.
So it's that policy decision. So,
After that fire season they had though, you got to think that there's a lot of people doing much more than the code says and doing some of that, best practices stuff, even though it's not required, there's a lot of people going, let's not go through this again. So, and, for us, I mean, I'll just take a second. My biggest fear as mayor, or his biggest fear, as a city councilor, is that having a fire come in here and then people saying, well, what did you guys do? How come it wasn't prevented? And being the guy on TV asking those questions, I don't want to be that person, right? So, no one's perfect and no one can make a city fireproof, but we got to just do the best we can. And you guys as a body can certainly, if you guys think we should ratchet it up, ratchet it up. I mean, you guys are independent from us. So if you guys feel like you want to go a little, even a notch above, I think that's fine. I don't think there's anything wrong with that because it'll certainly give us something to consider at the next level.
It'll be interesting if you could just keep an eye out for that. I mean, we can be the first. I'm okay with that too. I believe in this strongly, so.
well, and there, again, we're talking about our development code standards. There's there's a comprehensive, multi-jurisdictional and agency programming going on here from our federal, local partners, our fire district in different programs and funding opportunities to make this community more fire resistant. From the FireWise program and designated full neighborhoods, and that comes with resources and education and a neighborhood level, coordination and I don't know, collaboration to get there. So on to the flammable plant list. Again, noted that from the initial list that was produced, we found that 2 species were included in the fire resistant plant guide, so we removed those from the list. Also want to acknowledge that we're going to, or at least initial effort is to follow the City of Ashland example, and they utilize adoption of this list by resolution by the city council to provide that opportunity to be nimble. And so they have a program of reevaluating it on a regular cycle. So they are in March, I guess this month, they're going back to reevaluate their list. So that's where the opportunity to bring in new information, experts, et cetera, to say, are we on the right track? Do we have the best list for our community? I have had communication with the authors of the OSU Extension fire resistant plant guide. So they've given some initial feedback. They really just said many of these aren't common here and don't necessarily thrive here. So it's not an issue of having them on the list, but the idea of making it more locally appropriate and to our ecosystem.
Still redwood.
It'd be fun if we could.
I'm surprised. That says pine, like all pine trees, or is that a specific? Because there's a lot of different species of pine trees, and I think we all know that ponderosa pines have evolved for a long time with ecosystems with fire. So,
Yes.
well, and then these are within the 30-foot buffer. These are prohibited.
So it depends, but yes. And so this is for, again, we're moving, I get into these details later, but we're moving everything, including all of these species within that initial 5 feet. And then in the 30 feet, we're looking at, okay, if you well, we're not allowing new plantings of these species within the initial 30 feet. But if they are present, it doesn't say that you need to remove them entirely. They just have additional management requirements. So if you do, you've got your large, beautiful ponderosa trees on your property. We're not talking about removing those from your, entirely, but that's when we're going to employ those clearance and ladder fuel management. Yeah. So great point. And the folks from OSU Extension highlighted that. They said, wait a minute, ponderosas are known to be quite fire resistant when they're mature. But we've captured that with our allowances for significant trees. So again, getting into a brief summary, we have the details in the staff report, but again, touching on within that initial, well, first, if you have dead and dying vegetation, let's get rid of it and to remove that, that combustible. Within the initial 5 feet, removing all vegetation except for those significant trees. So those are in excess of 8 inches DBH. So they can be retained with proper management. Then no combustible materials. Again, that's your firewood or bark mulch or other vegetation. And then with fences that connect or butt up to homes or structures, they can do that, but within that initial 5 feet, that connection needs to be of a fire-resistant material, metal or other. It's known that, and if you see any of the videos coming from the Lahaina fire or the the Southern California fires, those fences can really serve as a wick for that fire to run straight up to that structure, make that contact and ignite the structure. So this 5 feet has been identified as kind of that acceptable preventative measure. Then we're moving to out to the 30 feet. No new plantings of flammable plants. And of that existing vegetation, we're looking for a 10-foot canopy spacing. The real number is the 10 feet. Canopy spacing, that's in from top to top, and also acknowledging that there may be trees in close proximity to each other that serve as one canopy structure. So if you have multiple trees that are clustered together, that's fine to keep that. But we're going to get the 10 feet on the outside of that shared canopy.
So that 10
Feature.
foot is from crown to crown or top of the tree, not the base of the tree like it's showing there. Is it at the base like that right there, the low limbs, or is it the crown, the very top of the tree that the 10 foot's measured from?
Looks like from the bottom.
Well,
This
that's
is
what
the-
that's
This is the
reflecting, yeah.
diagram. So I know that we're looking for full clearance from any vegetation from the chimney or the structure here. Let me double check, but in the wording, my understanding is from furthest extension of the limbs.
That'd be the canopy.
Yeah.
Not necessarily the pinpoint of a pine or just
Because that doesn't make.
conifer
sense.
tree.
Most ponderosa trees the branches are 10 feet long.
Right.
So if you measure from the top of the tree, it doesn't.
Yeah.
Yep. Or if you have other deciduous trees, it'd be from the outermost extension of the canopy.
Yeah, a lot of people in the industry call it a drip line. That's like the farthest branches out. So maybe there's some terminology that can be used.
Yeah, duly noted. We'll make sure that that's clarified. And then again, noted that separation or clearance from structure of 10 feet and then any chimney or other combustible appliance projections. And also this just shows horizontal. We're looking for 10-foot vertical clearance as well. So you can have a tree that encroaches over your structure, but it needs to maintain that clearance. And then ladder fuel management. That's from the trees, but also those flammable species of shrubs or grasses that we need to keep that 8 feet of clearance from the top of the vegetation to the lowest branch. There are some more specific provisions in the code for smaller trees. So we don't want to require a clearance that's going to compromise the health of a small tree. So it's representative of the overall height of the structure, or excuse me, of the tree.
When you were talking with Oregon State and doing some of your research, are like junipers one of the worst trees in terms of being flammable?
They didn't specify that, but it's certainly known. I mean, so we didn't have the conversation to say, yes, junipers are that most flammable. come to realize that but the junipers, arborvitae, spruce trees, other trees with high oil contents are known to be incredibly flammable and are many of our native species that we have in our landscape. So again, we've touched on many of the clearance, but we're really talking about clearance from the ground, separation of trees from each other, and the structure itself. And just trying to buzz through here, but those ladder fuels are an important part of it, because if you have a ground fire, if there's not that separation from that lowest branch of the tree, then with a species, these flammable plant species have a relatively long flame length that can reach up into that tree. Then you have a canopy fire, and it runs across the tree forest. Okay, and then lastly, increasing the requirement for any new roof or 50% replacement requiring a Class A roofing material. Again, asphalt shingles, tile, metal roofs are all fall within that Class A. This tends to be more standard practice on new construction anyway, or something that we choose for longevity of the roof. So this building measure isn't considered or thought to be an additional cost that someone would bear, that instead is a standard practice that we use. And then just want to acknowledge there may be special circumstance on a particular site that warrants some exception to these requirements. It may be that you do have an entirely fire resistant cinder block metal roof. It's not of any kind of fire prone material. So there may be an opportunity to have this vegetation closer to the structure or a different standard applied to that property. So we do have some opportunity to look or apply a different standard to those situations. And noting again that we would have, we look to the fire district and their professionals and have some requirements for consultation and approval authority granted to the fire official. Just buzzing through these, we audited the code, and we need to make sure that these new code provisions interlock with the existing provisions of the code. So it's really just largely references back to this new code to make sure that as someone is applying that code knows that we have these additional standards and point them to that, and that we're using the same terminology so that we don't break our code in applying new standards. So while this looks like a larger list, not a lot of substantive changes to those code sections. And I think we'll, again, just referencing the different references throughout the code. There are some associated definitions of terminology is new to the code, so we need to apply that to our definition section of the code. That make sure that it's known what fire resistant is, what the fire official is, and what's meant by these code provisions. So lastly, what is this all for or leading up to? We have a public hearing scheduled for your next meeting on March 20th. We'll prepare a formal staff report that'll be prepared and issued 7 days prior to the public hearing. And at any point now or prior to that public hearing, if you have any questions for me, please reach out. Happy to answer those. Make sure you're in a comfortable position to evaluate the scope of a relatively extensive number of changes, but all geared at the same goal. So with that, any other questions?
You're talking about any asphalt shingle Class A pretty much?
As far as I understand, yeah. So once you get into asphalt composition shingles, I don't know if asphalt comes in roll or all the way up to a composite shingle. I know for certainty that the composite shingles fall under that Class A.
There's some older 3-tab stuff that, it's not Class A at all. So, but most of the new stuff, not all, but most is pretty good. Um, I can tell you, city council really appreciates the hard work you guys do, and take a look at those definitions especially. They're kind of the base of everything. So if there's anything that you see that's questionable in the definition, go ahead and bring it up with Matt or Scott. Because I think that if we get a wrong definition, then that's what can really mess the code up, right? So just kind of make sure you guys understand that. We spend a lot of time kind of going through those definitions at the city council level as well. So, and we're always the second eyes, right? But you guys are the first pass at it for the most part.
Thank you for your time prior to tonight and then later on. And we went a little long, so I appreciate your patience. Thanks.
Thank you.
Any other,
Well done.
Thank you.
any other comments side of the? Matthew?
No other comments, sorry. No other comments for me. Thank you.
Right, I guess we're finished then, right?
We have a second item.
Second, oh,
Not so quick, Chair. We got another one on the agenda here that I'm gonna handle. Sorry about that. I'll try to be brief though. Apologize for not being there in attendance tonight. I've been out sick the last 2.5 days and still am sick, but I didn't want to miss this and didn't want to pawn it off to anybody. So that's why I'm not going to be showing my video tonight. So this is a workshop as well for a proposed development code amendment for the public facility / institutional zone that we're bringing forward for your consideration. So just backing up a little bit to explain how we got to this point. We have the new community center that has taken over at the old elementary school site. It utilizes a good portion of that school, the old school, but does not utilize all of it. They have come in under a community center use, which is a permitted use in the public facility PFI zone. So that's how they're operating there. There's also a preschool / kind of childcare business operating in there as well called Soul Blossom. They got in under kind of a similar use analysis that we did that was determined that it was close enough to school, which is an allowed use. But that only comprises about, I don't know, 3/4 of the space over at the school, and the school district is interested in utilizing leasing out some of that extra space for community uses. And several months back, a outfit called Treehouse Therapies came forward and was interested in occupying some space at the school, at the community center, shall we say. And so staff did a review. We tried to kind of understand better exactly what this therapy operation consisted of in terms of their services. And ultimately, we're not able to find a way to make it work within the constraints of the existing code. As you guys are all aware, each zone district has a use table that has a detailed list of the permitted uses in each of those zones. And that's kind of what planning staff operates by to determine whether a new use can go into a certain area. And so ultimately kind of had to tell this group that it was too much of a stretch. We looked at it as a kind of how it could possibly fit within a community center, our community center definition, but ultimately felt it was too much of a stretch. So they did recently go to city council to kind of introduce what their concept is and to state kind of what their situation is, how they'd like to operate there, what they do, and how they felt it was a good use of the space. And council agreed that it was a good use of the space and directed staff to basically come back with a code amendment that would accommodate that type of use. Flash forward to the 26th of February, we staff took it to council in a workshop to kind of better understand what the parameters of making changes to the public facility zone would consist of. We wanted to get an idea of kind of where their guardrails were, how much did they want to open up the possible uses there, and or not, and what kind of uses they were open to. They and Councilor Preen, you can help us out with this too, as when we get a chance. But council basically kind of arrived at wanting to open it up for other uses, but not open it up too much. They wanted to limit it to nonprofits. They wanted it to be health related. And they ultimately said that they wanted to add a new use category. There were some that thought that we might be able to just amend the community center definition to address this kind of use, but I think the ultimate decision was to create a new use category. And so staff laid out in the workshop staff report kind of some options for how we might be able to accommodate that, and that's where we're really looking for planning commission to kind of help us out to narrow down what they think is the most appropriate way to address this use. And then in addition, while we have the public facility zone open, council thought that it would be a good time to add childcare as an allowed use to that zone. We've had it well documented that trying to find childcare in this community is difficult, and affordable childcare even more so. And so the council was interested in adding this as a permitted use to the public facility zone to help address that need in the community. So I think that one is a pretty relatively easy fix. We already have a use category called childcare. In the childcare center, we have residential and commercial. And commercial would be the recommendation, and I think that allows anything over 16 children to be in the facility, and it's defined as any registered or certified childcare facility which is not a family childcare home. So staff is recommending that we add that as part of this process. So what would therapy use be? How would we classify that in our code in general? Well, we'd probably classify it as an office use. We have in the downtown commercial and the highway commercial zone already a office use, and in parentheses, medical, dental, professional, which this could slot under. And we could one idea is we could add this use to the public facility zone. However, you gotta factor in any change we make to this, addressing this parcel would also be something that we would also be opening up for any public facility institutional zone property in the city. And that includes other school-owned property, the administrative building, their other schools, the city hall, our public works headquarters, treatment center, treatment plant. And then we also have seven properties over along Trinity Way that are in the Heavenly Acres zone that were recently rezoned to public facilities / institutional. So important to factor in any decision we make. We got to be comfortable with it being in any of those potential zones. So this being an office use could open it up to any zone, and it could open it up to any type of office use, and not necessarily a nonprofit or a use that specializes working with children, such as like a Treehouse Therapies, which specializes in children. They do occupational behavioral therapy as well as physical therapy for children, and have worked in the schools in the past, and work all over Central Oregon. And so that's the use that, or the kind of use that the council was really interested in, but potentially allowing some other similar type of missioned organizations to potentially occupy the other some other space in this zone. And feel free to, I'm talking a lot, feel free to jump in at any time with questions, if you have any.
I have a question. Can we,
Yeah.
could we do like vet these people and then do a variance for them? And then like if somebody else ever wanted to apply, we can still have control of all of our public works facilities.
It's a good question. It's a good question, but
I mean, I agree with you. I mean, we're opening up to a lot of risky stuff that is that I can't even think of right now.
it's a good question. So your question was, why can't we just make a variance for this use in this zone for this particular case?
Yeah.
Well, the way the development code is written is that we do not. That's one thing that you cannot get a variance for is use in a zone. You can get variances for a lot of things, but that's not one of them.
Okay.
So
Scott, what about a community center overlay zone specifically for this center, which would apply only to this property and doesn't affect PF1 properties?
So that's a potential option. We have done overlay zones in the past. Some of you'll recall the changes we made a couple years ago to the downtown commercial zone, where we created overlay areas that weren't required to have mixed use. So that's one thought. I hadn't thought about that one before, but overlay zones are a potential tool to apply a distinct set of standards to specific properties.
We have them all over the city.
Why not here? Scott, does the city staff have a preference of option 1 or 2?
Well, so when you say option 1 or 2, option 1 is, I think the council kind of decided that it didn't kind of seem to fit with their kind of definition or a vision of a community center.
Too broad.
So planning commission could take their own path there. And if you don't want to do that, then the idea of adding a totally new use is another option. And like I said, I laid out A, B, C, D as options, potential options. B being health or youth related nonprofits. So that would limit it just to nonprofits and those that are specialized in the youth or health related. One other idea was to potentially add a community health center as an allowed use. Just a general definition I found on the internet was that's a nonprofit healthcare organization that provides affordable, comprehensive primary care services to underserved populations. We could modify that definition a little bit to make it work. One other factor that I
Can I jump in here real quick?
Yeah, please
I had
do.
a question. So let's say you wanted to I live next to a community center when I lived in Santa Clara County. So what if you wanted to have a flu shot clinic or a blood drive? Are those allowed at a community center? And are those also health related? Like, I don't know why just adding or health related activities is so, there's a lot of other health related activities besides just the therapy that might be excluded now and might not even fit into these other definitions and related uses. So I think maybe we could talk about other health related things that might happen at a community center.
Yeah.
Or
Sure.
childcare. Like, there's these other things to kind of consider, like, again, I lived right next to a community center, so they had flu vaccines and COVID vaccines, and they had other things besides just recreational or cultural or social activities.
What's the firehouse zoned over there?
What was that?
What's the firehouse? They do the flu. What are they zoned?
I think that's zoned MFR, I believe, multifamily.
So
That's what
Or it's residential, one of the two.
I mean, I'm okay with a lot of the things that you just said. I think it's great. We just have to isolate other public facilities, like the sewer treatment plant and the fire hall and some stuff. We just have
Go
to
get vaccinated.
because
at
we
the
just don't
13th
want,
one.
you know, and those are, you know, because we don't want in 5 years from now, like a whole, the city council goes crazy and they're like, we're just gonna do this. And that's our job is to protect us right now from that happening. And so we need to isolate some of those real public facilities that are geared towards what we're talking about.
But isn't option one just the definition of the community center? So that's just applicable to anything that is a community center, not,
Is it though? It says public facility though.
Well, community center is already an allowed use in all the public, so any public facility zone could do a community center right now if they met the definition.
Food, beer and wine is it a permitted use at the sewage treatment plant now, right?
Now we're talking.
So,
I'm there.
I agree with you. Their community centers, I think, have kind of broadened their offerings over the years. It's, you know, back in the day, it was just a place where you go play bingo and have a luncheon, but I think it is more things to more people. In fact, Treehouse Therapies does operate in a community center in Bend, where there's amongst other youth related nonprofits. So there are some examples out there of specifically this use and other similar uses operating in community centers.
I hate to create more overhead and stuff, but I believe that Eli's idea of segregating this property with a separate overlay and making these definitions on that so we don't affect the sewage, you know, lumpy lake out there, you know, with what we do here.
Well,
I can fully tell you right now, that wasn't even brought up at city council, so that's not even a consideration that we thought of. So
Well, something to factor in is that all these public facility zones have the ability to self-regulate. So, you know, they're not likely to probably allow uses that aren't kind of aligned with their mission. So we could do an overlay. We could do an overlay, I guess, but keep that in mind as well.
And I'll give you the other kind of the backstory of our discussion at city council was exactly what you're talking about, Daryl, which is if you crack it open and you open it too wide, then all of a sudden you have all this weird stuff out in the churches and, you know, again, potential rogue down the road, city council's doing weird stuff in other public facility zones that are city owned, right? So, that was definitely one of the things that we were concerned about. Somebody brought up, hey, let's let any nonprofit do it. It was like, hold on a second. That was shot down pretty darn fast. Like not all nonprofits are great nonprofits, right? I mean, some of them are a little wacky. So we suggested, and you know, I don't want to overburden you with our thoughts because, you know, you guys are a separate body, but at the same time, I think too broad is not good, right? So that's, you're right on the mark with that. And I think, you know, the other options mostly fall into the not too broad options. And I think that you guys can look at those and maybe this new idea of an overlay and, you know, you can figure out what you guys think is best.
that, or also you could do like a conditional use, right? You could add it in and then snap a conditional use on it so that then that way you restrict it. So they
I
have
don't know
to,
if you do that because it's a non-conforming, it would be a non-conforming use.
I mean, you could make something a conditional use that gives you a little bit more ability to review it, but I guess you got to think of is that a use that really creates a lot of additional external impacts that we would require somebody to have to try to mitigate for, you know, something that creates a lot of noise or a lot of traffic or something like that. Those are kind of the more uses that are traditionally signed a conditional use. But I would want to add just another point for your consideration, is that you know, we also have the Mosaic Medical use over by the school, which is you know, is a nonprofit health related organization. They were originally allowed under a use in a public facility zone called public building, which is to me an odd use in a public, that's more of a type of building or an ownership structure rather than a use. So we've got that use already in the community in a public facility zone. It was done through a site plan review. So if one thought is if we add the allowance for Treehouse to go into this community center, that would also legitimize more of that Mosaic medical use over there. So that and then also there's also a sort of a de facto community center over off of Trinity Way, one of the where the food bank is. So that's a little bit less of a there's no proposal for any health related uses to go over there, but I guess the Mosaic example would be one reason maybe,
Yeah.
or we could do 2 overlay zones, I guess, but to not just confine it just to this spot.
If you do like community health center, you could have a nonprofit psychedelic, PTSD treatment facility. That would fit.
You could go wild.
Yeah. So
And you're saying you couldn't stop them any other way?
Well, we might not be able to. We just need to create a way to get a whack at them every time they want to show up.
Mhm.
Or we can say no if we want to.
but
Where it's
it
not
could
just
be-
like, it's not
community
like
health
a strict
center, For
conforming.
example, is pretty broad. I mean,
Yeah,
A lot of things would fit into
yeah.
that.
I like the idea of the overlay zone and you put in like office and childcare and nonprofit, and then you've covered your butt on that one. And then if you need to do another overlay zone for Trinity Place, you can.
Yeah.
You have it now, and then you can apply. it.
I think the overlay zone is a good way to go too.
I like the affordable childcare thing. I think that's a great idea, but just straight childcare.
Yeah, throwing the
We
word.
wouldn't be limiting it to
Yeah.
affordable. We would just be it would just provide the opportunity for it to happen there.
You have to define affordable and everything
Yeah.
else. too.
Yeah. But the problem is then they're going to be making money off of it on a public facility. They're going to childcare is very profitable.
I don't think we can put the word affordable in there. It would just be
Yeah.
childcare. And then
Yeah,
that the company would set
I-
whatever rate.
I agree.
But I think that,
Yeah.
I think having a conditional use for
Childcare.
either for childcare or even just for the health and youth related nonprofits is enough, because any conditional use has to come through the city in a specific review. It's just not allowed outright. So there's control there with the other properties. I'm more inclined to do a conditional use than an overlay, just because I feel like overlays are extra bureaucratic
Yeah,
burden for
right.
people. But that's my opinion.
What was the negative for conditional use, though? Scott?
Well, it's not necessarily negative, but it's it is more. You talk about more bureaucracy or more process. If it's a minor conditional use, you would have to go through a type 2 review, where you'd have to submit an application, pay a fee. It could take 3 months, and you have to notify the neighbors. And if the neighbors don't like you for some reason, they could appeal something and tie you up for a while. So I just want to throw that out as a piece of information. And I guess I just don't know what the additional impact. It's like I say, a conditional use is for something that creates a lot of traffic, a lot of noise. If properly mitigated, could very well fit within that zone. I guess I'm just wondering what the impacts we would be mitigating with a medical office use. So I guess that's another piece of information. We could do it just to have a little more oversight, I guess you'd say, but I guess what would we be mitigating? What would we be asking them to mitigate properly? What impact? I probably just lost you there, but that's something we have to make a finding with for a conditional use review, is have they properly mitigated the impacts?
Get enough feedback, Scott?
What's that?
Get enough feedback?
Well, I've got some good feedback. I don't know if I've got a consensus necessarily, unless I'm not hearing it correctly.
Yeah. Is there?
It sounds like you guys would like to try to limit it to either have some kind of safeguard for the community, whether it be an overlay zone or a conditional use or something that would kind of keep it from being opened up
Yes.
too broadly.
And we have to be careful with the wording too. We've identified that making it a health-related nonprofit could, open it up to microdose,
Yeah.
a bunch of kids running around on acid over there or something. I mean, that's way out there, but I mean, we have to be careful what we do
Yep.
there.
I agree.
That might have been tongue in cheek in my, but I'm sure people out there are thinking that kind of stuff too, though.
Oh, when I was growing up, it wasn't so tongue in cheek.
So, Rick, do you like some of those options, the overlay or the conditional use?
Well, I kind of like the overlay, but like I said, that does, create more of a burden.
Sure.
And we just got through dealing with a special overlay over here, with that whole
I know.
area that we dealt with over here. And so they can be a pain in the butt, but, we have to protect us somehow, protect the Lumpley Lake from, all of our other different facilities. How can we zero in on this facility and then protect it so
What-
that it's not doing a bunch of weird stuff?
Why don't they just go rent a private facility and go at it?
Well, that's a good question for them, but I think that they, what I've understand is that they're a nonprofit and they do Medicare, and they're primarily Medicare, and so I would think that this opportunity would provide a more affordable place for them to locate, and like I said, they do a lot of work with the schools already, and I think they just need more space to do that. And so I think that's probably the response that you would probably get from them is
So-
why they're interested in this space.
I'll be honest.
So, I mean, I guess this is outside of our spectrum, but the school district isn't gonna charge them rent?
No, they'll charge them rent. My understanding it is that it's below market rate.
Yeah.
Yeah,
They're just trying to fill the space,
yeah,
It's,
I get it, yeah. No, I understand.
It
I,
is a good fit.
it's a good.
The only reason they weren't able to be shoehorned in is because they don't have that educational component that's already part of it, that the other place has. The other, what is it? It's young child care that has an education
I
component,
think
so.
making nonprofit health a conditional use in that, then we can screen what happens.
I think the terminology is health and youth together, right? Is that the,
Health or loot, it's health or use,
oh, I thought it was and.
not and.
Help us out, Scott.
You can certainly modify it any way you see fit. If you want to add
Maybe they
and,
is what.
and that's fine.
I don't know.
Youth and health related health related services for youth. It's also a nonprofit. We could work on the wording for there, but it sounds like to make it as narrow as possible is what the group would
I
like
mean,
to
it
see.
gets them and not many others, right? That's kind of what maybe I shouldn't be commenting at this point.
No, but that's what we're talking about.
That would help you with the childcare center and the therapy, right?
Yes.
That would solve two birds, one stone. Yes.
And I think
Well, I think we should add childcare specifically too, if you're interested in that.
Hold it, or
Well, in terms of the options you laid out in option 2, I feel like D doesn't really make sense for this because it allows more for profit,
Yeah, I don't like that.
right?
Uh-huh.
And same with A, you said, Anna?
Yeah.
And C to me is a little bit, the definition in terms of primary care services. I feel like therapy usually doesn't fall under primary care. But that could just be a semantic.
I like that. Yeah, good point.
Any other thoughts before we send you away?
no, I think we kind of had a consensus on 2B and 3,
or some sort of,
or some sort of
yeah, with the
the
wordsmithing.
wording, yeah, a little bit of wording like and health and youth related instead of or,
We can work on that. I understand what you're trying to get at, so I'll work on that.
Trying to let these guys in the door, but we want to make it, we want to kind of close the door behind them a
Youth,
little bit.
youth or community health related nonprofits.
I'd love
Then
the
it-
attorneys to do it.
Because then you could have a community health nonprofit.
right.
But I wouldn't want to exclude nonprofit here like Soul, which is a health benefit for
Seniors.
or adults who also have disabilities, but because they could be over 18, they're not considered youth. That's like,
Yeah.
what are we considering youth? Is it under 18?
Yeah, so you do really zero down the, we have an older, in the past, we've had a fairly older community here as a retirement community. We're getting younger all the time, as we can tell, by the other end of the table, you guys are all great.
When I was a kid,
Yeah.
not always been old.
But, so I guess, I kind of agree with you, Julia, that, narrowing it down to youth, will exclude our elder populations too, which I'm getting closer and closer to, so,
Okay.
So leaving the or in there is good.
Or and/or. Just murky it up.
Yeah. Yeah, and or,
And/or.
With a slash.
yeah, no.
All right. Great discussion, great feedback. Appreciate it. We'll bring this back in April for a public hearing, and we'll have the opportunity to further refine it through that process. So thank you.
I'm
That
you guys are on the commission now. You guys are bringing some really good insights and you're thinking about things. Thumbs up,
Love new people.
Yeah, new people, you're knocking it out of the park. Except we're gonna have to separate you guys, having you guys all grouped together, we gotta get, kind of weave things together.
Before we close out, any staff or commissioner comments?
I think just talking about the next meeting coming up with a defensible space hearing, and then followed by April 3rd for the community center would be the next two meetings. And that's all I have.
Be here for the March 20th, because it's spring break. Anna, I don't know about Jeremy, who has a kid,
I will not be here either.
so that's something to consider.
You might not have
Sure you have a
quorum.
quorum. Just make sure you have a quorum.
Can we explore that right now?
I won't be there.
I won't be there.
Next meeting,
That's fine.
March 20th.
Yes.
Should be here.
I should be here. Oh, yeah, a couple
That's
weeks.
the first week of the 2-week spring break. I won't be here, so have fun, y'all.
Right, so Jeremy might not be here either.
Should check with him, yeah.
Yeah.
So Art's here.
Okay, you got four. then.
Rutzman.
That's 4, so we're okay.
Nobody can get sick.
If you get sick, call us on vacation.
He has a kid and they're going on spring break.
Text.
Don't come.
I'm not gonna get very far.
Yeah.
We'll be annoying.
Flying back.
No.
So like I like.
Oh, you going early?
We're going Saturday.
Before or after?
We booked it kind of late and.
Okay, any other?
At least you get that.
None for me.
I'll just give a highlight about Arbor Day. It will happen on the fourth Friday of April, April 25th. So we're working on the finishing touches for that event. We'll be planting trees below that extra wide sidewalk at the southeast corner of the roundabout. So if you go by there, you'll see that really wide sidewalk. We'll be planting trees where it's right now. Yeah,
Mm.
Friday, April 25th.
You saying the new roundabout or?
Yeah, the new one. Yeah.
Okay.
Just down the street from there. Southeast corner of the roundabout.
So just so you know, the extra wide sidewalk was built that way for longer trucks that come through the roundabout that can't make the turn, and they actually have to get an ODOT permit to go down that sidewalk because it's pretty much a straight shot instead of trying to go around the curvy part of the roundabout. So that's what it's there for.
Pedestrians on the sidewalk when they make. the turn.
No, that's what a permit's for. And you'll notice that they're over there in front of the bank across from Dairy Queen, there's another kind of straight part that has bollards in front of it, and they just removed the bollards so an extra long truck with a long load can actually kind of straighten the whole line out. So those are ODOT designed, by the way.
I have to say that the new roundabout is really strange going through in terms of trying to see if somebody else is gonna come in or not. It's much more difficult than the first one we did. not as functional. Okay. Oh, yeah, yeah.
Now we can, either end of town. I kind of like, I'm a big roundabout fan. Yeah, I would have designed it a little differently, but they didn't ask me. I sold it.
Here.
Next month.
Great. All right, meeting adjourned.